Are you ready?
Yes.
It's recording.
It's recording, and if this works, we'll be live on Facebook.
Oh, okay.
Should I share my screen?
Yes, please. Both of you are co-hosts as well, so you should be able to talk to one another. You need to. Okay. Are you ready for me to go live? Okay, we are now live on Facebook. I'm going to let everyone in, all right?
Sounds good.
Going to be awesome. We're going to be, since we're starting a little late, I'm going to give us until 10:40, okay?
Sounds good.
I'm in. I'm in. School.
And that was for me.
Welcome everyone to session number 1. Please make sure to mute yourself.
Or you can
I'm in.
I'm not paying you.
Can everyone please mute themselves?
School.
Okay.
Welcome everyone. I'm going to give us about 1 more minute to make sure everyone can get into the meeting. Currently, we have 72 participants. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to begin with our first student presentation for session number 1 with Sophia and Tanmayee. We just want to quickly remind you of the rules that were set out during the opening remarks. So at this time, if you have not already done so, please go ahead and mute yourself so that you are not distracting the presentation. We greatly appreciate that. We'd also recommend you put your view mode in speaker view so that you can see the slides as well as the person speaking during the presentation. If at any point during the presentation today you have any questions or comments that you would like to send our way, we'd ask you to please use the chat box feature within Zoom and to privately message. This is very important. Don't everyone message. Privately message me, the Ethics Institute host, and I will make sure that your comment or question gets read out loud at the appropriate time. There may be some times when we're going to have some open discussion, at which time I kindly ask you to privately chat me, the Ethics Institute, a raised hand text in the chat box so that I know that you're interested in speaking, and I will call on you by name, at which point we ask you to unmute yourself. Right, so if everyone is muted and our student presenters are ready to go, we can kick this off.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today, our presentation will be addressing the ethical implications of nuclear warfare and pharmaceutical pollution in water. We hope that by the end of this presentation, you will have a newfound perspective on what it means to be responsible and accountable as an individual within society. Before we begin, please pause and reflect on this question. Should your ethical responsibilities depend on your role in society? Keep thinking about your answer to this question throughout the rest of the presentation. In 1945, President Truman made the executive decision to drop an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. Every day, millions of people make the decision to dump their unneeded and unwanted medication down the toilet. Typically, we only think about how a leader has the exclusive power to influence society. Please answer the following question via the online poll. Who plays a more prominent role in society, a president or an individual?
All right, about 15 more seconds for the poll.
No, 25.
Okay, so it seems like 53% of our audience believes that a president is the most important, while 47% believe that the individual is. Okay. So we hope that by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to see that the impact of both a president and an individual are the same regardless.
Before we begin our presentation, we would like for you all to understand or learn a few ethical vocabulary that will be essential in our presentation today. The ethical definition of responsibility is a concept that refers to the fact that individuals and groups have obligations to others. It includes more than just the general purpose of a role, but also the consequences from a part of set of obligations. Another important value in our presentation today is accountability. Accountability is a readiness to have one's actions judged by others and, where appropriate, accept responsibility for errors or excellence. It is also the ownership of an action, whether or not the consequences were good or bad. Accountability also has an underlying implication that something will have to be completed in order to remedy. Blame, on the other hand, suggests total wrongdoing for an action that is unfathomable or unforgivable, and that the person who committed the action should reap the consequences that they caused. The difference between accountability and responsibility is that responsibility is the obligation that comes with possessing a certain role or position of power, while accountability is the ownership of consequences of an action made by a person in power. In a given situation, responsibility can be applied before the action, so the responsibility of one's thoughts and intentions, and during the action, the responsibility of what actually happens. However, after the action, the role of accountability arises because one has the responsibility to be accountable for their past actions. Before we begin, we want to give you a brief introduction to the stakeholders in both of these dilemmas. In nuclear warfare, the governments are an essential stakeholder, while in pharmaceutical pollution, the individual people are an important stakeholder. But in both situations, the environment and the general public are critical as well. Consequentialism is an ethical principle and framework for how we will be analyzing our topics today. Consequentialism is an ethical theory that judges whether or not something is right by what its consequences are. We will also be using the principle and framework of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism that determines right from right by focusing on outcomes. It holds that the most ethical choice is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number. For example, in the issue of pharmaceutical pollution, the main stakeholder, or the individual people, utilize consequentialism when making a decision to dump or not dump their medicine down the toilet. The individual person can say they flush medicine down the toilet because if not, someone in their family would come across these medicines and would be put in great danger.
We can look at utilitarianism through the lens of nuclear warfare. For example, based on the idea that utilitarianism is the greatest good for the greatest number of people, President Truman can justify his decision to drop an atomic weapon on the city of Hiroshima because he wanted to save as many American lives as possible. He believed that by dropping the bomb, he would save more lives than if he had not. So before we look at the ethical implications of both nuclear warfare and pharmaceutical pollution, we will each spend some time providing important background information about our own individual topics. Because the effects of nuclear warfare are both so severe and so drastic, the ethicalities of the usage of these weapons present themselves most prominently through a historical analysis of Hiroshima. In 1940, Japan joined the Axis powers alongside Germany and Italy. On June 28, 1941, President Roosevelt established the Office of Scientific Research and Development for Atomic Research, fearful of the control and power that the Germans would hold over the Americans if they were able to develop the atomic bomb first, after the discovery of X-rays spotlighted the promise of the atom. This eventually led to the creation of the Manhattan Project. In 1941, the Japanese Army launched an attack on Pearl Harbor, prompting the United States to declare war against the Axis powers. A week after Hitler committed suicide in 1945, the Axis powers surrendered to the Allies, allowing the Americans to turn their full attention to the war in Asia. On August 6, 1945, under President Truman's orders, the United States dropped the atomic bomb, nicknamed the Little Boy, on the city of Hiroshima. The second atomic bomb, called the Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki on August 9th. Both of these events led the Japanese to surrender to the United States on August 14, 1945. When a nuclear weapon is dropped, such as the one released on Hiroshima, a fireball occurs with temperatures similar to the surface level temperature of the sun. Temperatures at the site of denotation reached nearly 4,000 degrees Celsius, which is hot enough to boil and vaporize people in the immediate vicinity. Fires can spontaneously occur over vast areas of surrounding terrain, and toxic gas and smoke is immediately released. Anywhere from 90,000 people to 166,000 people died just from the Hiroshima bombing alone. To put that into perspective in correlation with the current pandemic, as of this morning, there are 72,023 deaths in the United States. Those who didn't immediately die as a result of the atomic bomb suffered immensely. They experienced third-degree burns, nausea, headaches, diarrhea, and fever. This was all a result of radiation. Exposure to radiation can cause acute, near-immediate effect by killing cells and directly damaging the tissue. Cancer can occur as a result of radiation because it contains mutations in the DNA of living cells. This is because the radiation can deposit molecular bond-breaking energy, which can damage DNA and severely alter the genes as a result. In response, a cell will either repair the gene, die, or retain the mutation, thus causing cancer. The most prominent type of cancer that can occur as a result of radiation is leukemia. For the recipient of a nuclear weapon, there are arguably no benefits. There is only destruction. It could be said that the bomb potentially saved more Japanese lives who would inevitably lose their lives in direct combat against the Americans. For the Japanese citizens of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, their safety and security was sacrificed for the guaranteed safety and security of the American people. And yet, the United States felt that they had an obligation to protect American citizens. Arguably, the Roosevelt administration felt that there was no obligation to engage in warfare unless American lives were directly at stake. If the United States pursued more additional warfare methods, more Americans could lose their lives, and then the American government would not be considered responsible. So, who was impacted by the decision to drop the bomb on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Who must have President Truman kept in mind when making his decision? Each of these labeled portions of the circle were and are stakeholders, and they are all closely intertwined. If one of them is directly affected, the rest are as well. Our governments budget funding and money towards research for new nuclear technologies that enhance our nuclear arsenal, that argue and debate and declare war against other governments. It is also the president who ultimately has the power to make the decision to utilize a nuclear weapon. They are also, some may argue, completely responsible for the well-being of their citizens and the morals and ideologies that they value and must maintain for the sake of their people and of their society. That is another stakeholder, the innocent, the larger well-being. The economy is also relevant. It costs a lot of money to develop weapons, and it costs a lot of money for reparations, especially for countries that are already at a disadvantage economically. What about those who capitalize on nuclear technology in the medical and scientific field to do good? And lastly, the environment. Radioactive materials are not renewable resources, and the effects of such have severe consequences on so many aspects of the natural world, some of which are still apparent even today. Nuclear warfare is not something that is exclusively captive to the past. The threat of nuclear weapons is more prevalent than ever. For example, we almost faced nuclear war with Iran this past winter. It is nearly impossible to fathom the level of destruction that atomic weapons are capable of as nuclear technology continues to advance. We should not forget Hiroshima and all the destruction and devastation that followed as a result. We should, if necessary, look to Hiroshima as an example. So I'm going to read the following scenario. There are two options. Based on what you have heard thus far, select either answer choice A or B in the poll. Imagine that you are the prime minister of a governing small nation that is going to war with a much larger, better equipped nation. You are losing the war and your allies cannot provide substantial support. Thousands of soldiers are dying each day. Your military advisors suggest dropping atomic bombs on central cities in the opposing nation. What would you do? Would you drop the bomb or would you avoid dropping the bomb?
About 10 more seconds for the poll.
Okay, we were wondering if anybody would be willing to share why they chose to drop or not drop the bomb. If you would like to share out loud, you can either type a response in the chat or just chat the Ethics Institute indicating that you would like to speak.
All right, Claire, would you like to share? Make sure to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I chose drop the bomb because I think when you are the head of a country, your responsibility is to protect the people of your country. And I think although it's unfortunate for the other country, your responsibility is to protect your own citizens.
Right. Anybody else want to share? No.
Mr. Gates has his hand raised. Would you like to go, Mr. Gates? Make sure to unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I went with don't not to drop the bomb. The logic being there is if your goal is to defend your citizens and your people, you're going to war against a nation that's much that's bigger than you. The assumption is if you have nuclear weapons, they have nuclear weapons. You drop a bomb on them, they're going to drop the bomb on you, and ultimately your goal of protecting your citizens will not work out.
Right. We see that theme pretty commonly today, actually, especially if you look at what happened with Iran this past winter. We can see that no one decided to go to war with each other because there was that fear of retaliation. Okay, thank you.
Like Sophia emphasized in her presentation today about how the president of a country has a significant choice to drop a nuclear bomb or to not drop a nuclear bomb, what we will explore in the second half of the presentation today is how we are all dropping our own hypothetical bombs with pharmaceuticals. My presentation today will focus on the implications of pharmaceutical pollution in the waterways, where we will analyze who is truly responsible in this situation while maintaining an emphasis on personal responsibility. The most common or prevalent drugs found in the waterways and drinking water throughout the United States are antibiotics, contraceptives, antidepressants, and steroids. The most prevalent and potent form of pharmaceutical pollution into the waters happens when pharma companies either dump large amounts of their pharmaceutical waste drugs into the sewers or nearby small waterways. However, in America, there's also a widespread practice of flushing pharmaceuticals down the toilet when they expire or when the owner wants to dispose of them. Through the sink and toilet system, the pharmaceuticals enter into local waterways. Millions of Americans do this throughout the year, so we can only imagine how much each individual person is contributing to pharmaceutical pollution. Also, drugs taken by people are not completely metabolized. So when humans go to the bathroom, they are getting rid of parts of non-metabolized drugs which make their way into the waterway. We individual humans, knowingly or unknowingly, play a significant role in the effects of pharmaceutical pollution. The prevalence of these pharmaceuticals in the waterways has an inevitable effect on the aquatic life. The most commonly found medicine in water are antidepressants. Antidepressants mainly interact with the serotonin, a chemical in the brain. In fish, Serotonin plays a large role in reproductive behaviors and aggressive activities. In addition to the effects reported on aggression, feeding rate, and activity, several studies have investigated how the antidepressants affect other behaviors such as courting, schooling, and shelter seeking. Also, another huge problem with pharmaceuticals in the waterways is the evidence of feminized male or intersex fish. The occurrence of feminized fish has been associated with the pharmaceutical pollution of birth control. A main synthetic component found in birth control, made with estrogen-based chemicals, has been found to be responsible for the feminizing of fish. This chemical is causing change in behavioral patterns, breeding patterns, and defense patterns of fish. Several comprehensive studies in the past decade have highlighted this issue, yet society and pharmaceutical companies continue to dispose of their waste into waterways in spite of the clear destruction of biodiversity and aquatic environments. Although aquatic life has been proven to be under the effects of pharmaceutical pollution, there have been fewer studies on pharmaceuticals actually being found in drinking water and therefore affecting humans. According to the World Health Organization, concentrations in surface waters and treated drinking waters which receive wastewater effluents only had trace concentrations of pharmaceuticals. However, just because concentrations are trace does not mean there won't be any effects on humans. As of right now, there are very few systematic monitoring practices or studies that are available on human exposure to pharmaceuticals from drinking water. Also, even if there are pharmaceuticals in our water, many wastewater filtration systems do not have the ability to detect these pharmaceuticals. Having access to clean water is a fundamental human right. With pharmaceuticals in our water at any given concentration, do we truly have access to clean water? Also, even though aquatic life are the ones being altered and damaged due to pharmaceuticals as of right now, we humans will also indirectly be affected as well. This is because if we consume fish that are chemically affected, we too will be ingesting unnatural and potentially harmful sources of food. Also, as demonstrated many times in history, all parts of the ecosystem need to be thriving in order for us to survive. If the aquatic life is being disrupted now, it is only a matter of time until we are clearly and directly affected as well. To understand this issue more clearly, we must see who is responsible and who needs to be accountable within society. The governments, who are the base of our society, have not yet classified pharmaceuticals as pollutants, so legally they cannot do anything about pharma dumping and waste disposal. So then does the responsibility fall to the pharma companies? They are the largest waste creators and they have the ability to stop a major portion of pharma pollution in our world by not dumping their waste into water. However, every individual human plays a role in this form of pollution as well. For example, physicians are the ones who write prescriptions and essentially provide civilians access to these pharmaceuticals. The amount, duration, and type of oral contraceptive they prescribe that may get flushed down the toilet by the consumer plays a large role in the pollution of the waterways. Lastly, you, me, and every other individual who receives medicine has power and control over the pollution in our waterways. Whether we ethically dispose of the medicine or flush down the medicine down the toilet is our choice that stems from our control. This issue is not clear-cut. There are nuances in all aspects of society that make this issue ever so pressing. The governments tolerate the lobbying of pharmaceutical companies, which then gives these pharmaceutical companies the idea that they have the freedom to do many things. Some of these actions include the unethical disposal of their waste or how they give incentives to physicians. These companies often provide incentives and give psychological pressure to physicians who then tend to overprescribe medication. Overprescription of medication for a longer period of time causes excess medicine to pile up in millions of households of individuals around America who end up flushing this medicine down the toilet. The clear-cut answers of who should be responsible are not evident, and they will not be for a long time. But while we wait, ecosystems all around the world are suffering, and inherently, we will suffer too. So the role of the individual and your role as a consumer of medicine and how you dispose of it is critical to our water and earth. With this information in mind, I want you all to imagine a scenario where you will have to make a difficult decision about pharmaceutical waste disposal. Imagine that you are the head of a pharmaceutical company and you just learned of how your unregulated pharma waste is ruining the ecosystems around you. Your only other option to removing pharma waste is much more expensive, which could potentially cause your company to lose a lot of money. What would you do? Please take a few minutes to think about the scenario and then choose if you would like to go with answer choice A or B.
About 10 more seconds to complete the poll.
Okay, so it seems like 97% of you said that you would find another more environmentally friendly way to dispose of the waste in the waterways, while 3% of you said you would continue to dump the waste in the waterways. Would anyone be willing to share why they chose to continue to dump the waste or why they chose not to dump the waste?
Please just chat raised hand. All right, Ms. Cohen. Chaffee Cohen.
Hey. Yep, thank you. Hi. I said that I would find a more environmentally friendly way, but I imagine that would be really challenging. And I guess I would think about also the role that government might play in helping facilitate like converting to other methods, like maybe providing subsidies or some sort of incentives. And it might also be worth pointing out that the Clean Water Act doesn't actually protect against pharmaceuticals. So that might be a loophole that needs to be closed in the government as well.
Yeah, the governments have not yet classified pharmaceuticals as pollutants. So as I discussed earlier, that would be the first step in making big change. But also looking at it on the flip side, for those who continue to dump the waste in their waste in the waterways, the companies have to find another way. If they want to continue in a more environmentally friendly way, they would have to find a way that would potentially be much more expensive. And this would cause the companies to lose a lot of money that they could use to provide jobs and to create life-saving medicines.
We have another person who'd like to add, Erin Raw.
I wanted to add that I said I would find another environmentally friendly way because as challenging as it would be, that would be something in the long run very beneficial to the company and probably, at least I would consider something that would make the company like seem very, environmentally friendly and very well run. So I think ultimately in the long run, it would only help them, not hurt them, even though they might take a hit financially immediately.
Thank you. After listening to both of our presentations today, we would like you to think about this idea. We are all familiar with the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility. But should great power come with greater responsibility?
In order to determine if a given person in either scenario is making ethical decisions, here are the following ethical concepts that we must consider. The first one is the benefits and harms that can result from doing the action itself. Next, we need to consider both the short-term and long-term effects that can arise. Then, what are the things that we know and what do we not know about doing the given action? We also need to consider any prominent values. Lastly, what options does one have after doing the action, and what is the specific choice that they make? It is important to know the benefits and the harms in order to best determine if responsibility and accountability are being maintained. There tends to be a general assumption that nuclear power is all destruction and no benefit, which is not the case whatsoever. Nuclear technology is actually utilized daily. About 10% of our world's energy comes from nuclear reactors, and the 98 operating power reactors in over 30 states account for 20% of the total energy consumed by Americans on a daily basis. Additionally, radiology, which is the broad area of using images produced by radiation to diagnose and treat illnesses, such as to identify broken bones and cancer, utilize nuclear technology. Radioactive material is used in agriculture to help improve food crops, control insects, and retain moisture in soil. If we were to completely get rid of nuclear technology, modern society would inevitably suffer because we have become so reliant on this technology. However, we also have to know how severe the consequences can be if it is used on such a massive destructive scale. If we are not responsible with our usage of nuclear technology, enormous consequences can arise. As we saw with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the effects of the deployment of nuclear weapons can affect generations to come. We all have a duty to be aware of our usage of nuclear technology and the impact that we have on the environment, on other people, and on ourselves by using it. But the responsibility in deciding to deploy an atomic weapon falls solely to the president.
In the case of pharmaceuticals, so much good can come from this industry. Millions, or perhaps even billions of lives, both human and animal, every year are saved through the distribution of pharmaceutical drugs. The way we live and how we approach situations are a result of having access to these life-saving medicines. However, with unregulated distribution and unregulated disposal of these products, immense ramifications will arise, as we have seen in this presentation. With pharma companies dumping their waste and physicians prescribing unnecessary medical pills, and even us, individuals flushing pills down the toilet, we are contributing to the destruction of our ecosystems and soiling our water. Aquatic life is being heavily disrupted, and now us humans have the potential to be drinking water, or already are drinking water that are polluted with pharmaceuticals. To prevent further destruction, restrictions must be applied and knowledge must be shared. Another element that is important to consider are the short-term and long-term consequences that could potentially arise in both topics. As it has been reiterated throughout this presentation, in the short term, people continually dump their unwanted medications down the toilet, and pharmaceutical companies do this as well with no regulations. These individuals and companies don't believe the potential consequences of their actions. However, in the long term, as seen here, as a result of pharmaceutical dumping, lakes have been frothing, where chemical waste rises to the top of lakes and millions of fish are being killed. Since this topic is just coming to light again, we will inevitably find many more harsh long-term effects of pharmaceutical pollution.
Regarding nuclear warfare, as I previously discussed, there are a variety of short-term effects. Most of us are aware of these consequences. There's an immediate toll on the environment because of the spontaneous fires, the release of toxic gas, and radiation fallout. And as we all know, massive health consequences arise as a direct result of the bomb's power, as well as the radiation fallout. Long-term, environmental and health effects still linger. Just as many people can die from cancer that gradually develops over time, which is triggered by the exposure to radiation. It's also essential to consider what we know and what we don't know about a certain action. Regarding nuclear warfare, we are all consciously aware of the total inevitable devastation that follows, including both the long-term and short-term impacts. However, there are still some aspects of utilizing nuclear weapons that are still unclear. For instance, we know that cancers can develop with time, but scientists are still uncertain if any deformities or mutations that Hiroshima survivors develop can also be passed on to their children. We also still don't entirely know the effects of living in an area previously exposed to a high concentration of atomic radiation.
Like I have said previously, as pharmaceutical pollution is an issue that is coming into public attention after many years, what we know so far is far less than what we don't know. We know that there is indeed pharmaceutical pollution in our water and that it is destroying aquatic life and disrupting natural ways of life. We also know that pharmaceuticals have been making their way into drinking water in trace concentrations. However, just because concentrations are trace does not mean there will or won't be any effects on humans. Another element that is important in being responsible and accountable is what the individual would value. In pharmaceutical pollution, where the individual person can be a regular citizen or a head of a pharma company, they both are major stakeholders, but they would value different things. The regular citizen would value the safety of themselves and their family, as they would want to dump or flush their medicine down the toilet to protect themselves and their family members from potential dangerous situations, such as drug overdosing, addiction, or exposure to high-dose dangerous medicines. Likewise, a head of a pharmaceutical company would value the cheaper but more harmful way of pharmaceutical disposal because a more environmentally friendly way would cost much more money. This money could go to the company, which would then provide jobs while producing life-saving medicines.
Likewise, let's assume that we are analyzing if a president's course of action is responsible. A president would clearly value the safety and security of his own people. He could also value his own political position and power, which could either deter or encourage him to make the decision to drop an atomic bomb. He would also most likely value long-term economic security and medical safety. Depending on what value the president prioritizes, his decision could greatly differ from the opinion of another president who could also be facing the same hypothetical decision. It is also important to consider the potential course of action after the decision is made to see if it is responsible and accountable. For example, a president may provide aid for the country's reparations or may deliberately choose to avoid helping another country and solely focus on bettering their own nation.
After a responsible and accountable individual learns about the effects of pharmaceutical pollution, they should make efforts to change the norm of dumping medicine down the toilet. Whether it is to stop dumping medicine down the toilet themselves or raising awareness in their local communities, such as creating access and avenues for ethical medicine drop-off, information should be spread and change should be made.
So we want you to think back to the question that we asked you in the beginning of the presentation, which was who plays a more prominent role in society, a president or an individual? So 54% of you guys said that you believe that the president is the most important, while 46% of you said that the individual is the most important. So does anybody want to share, if now, at the conclusion of our presentation, if they would answer differently and why? So again, you can just chat to the Ethics Institute if you would like to speak.
Catherine Paris would like to comment.
Yes, at the start of the presentation, I initially voted that the president has the bigger role in this because at the end of the day, they have like the executive decision but they should take into account. But I think it's important to consider the individual's perspective on this because a president is nothing without the support of individuals. And that's why, especially in our country, we're a democracy and we play a big role in what the president may decide to do. So I think while the president may have the executive decision and the final role in what ends up happening, I think our opinions can influence what he or she in the future ends up choosing to do.
All right, anybody else?
Yeah, Vivian Germain would like to speak.
Hi, first of all, thank you for this presentation. It's been really good and I've learned a lot, so thank you both. I said in the beginning that a president plays a more prominent role in society, and the reason why I chose that was because the way I interpret the role prominent, part of that has the word prominent, part of it has to do with like importance and significance, but also part of it has to do with like how large your influence is in society, how much people are seeing you, things like that. So if the word is important, I would say that both a president and an individual have equally important roles in society because anyone's individual actions can have far-reaching ramifications. But in terms of prominence, I would say it would be the president who not only their action consequences, but there's also so many people watching the president and letting that inform their own decisions about what is and isn't right in this world.
Vivian, that's an interesting distinction between prominent versus importance. And I have a comment here that seems to reflect a similar distinction, that individuals might have more power, but the president has a lot of influence over how individuals act.
Right. It's important to think about the difference between the two, as Vivian clearly defined. So thank you, Vivian, and thank you to everyone else who responded.
After immersing in this discussion with us, we want you to think again. Should your ethical responsibility and accountability depend on your role in society? Would you change your initial answer and why? But we want you to think about this for yourself.
So in conclusion, the ramifications of the actions of both an individual and a person in power have the potential to have equally devastating consequences. We should continue to question and ponder our own decisions and those made by others. We should understand the significance of our own role in society and the importance of every individual's decisions. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are any questions, we can take them now.
Great, so we have about 5 to 10 minutes. We're now in gallery view, so if you're on Zoom and you want to switch to gallery view so you can see everyone to make it feel more like a in-person discussion, feel free to do so. And I'll be moderating in the chat box, so send raised hand if you'd like to talk, or I'm happy to read something that you type out. Tanmayee, there's a question about what responsibility you think that pharma companies have to educate their consumers about proper disposal.
What I actually explored into in my paper was the fact that governments actually have the responsibility, or I believe that they have the responsibility to educate the people, because in the end, pharmaceutical companies are just a business and they're there to make money. So they technically don't have the obligation, or I don't really believe that they definitely should have the responsibility, but it's not something that we should spend a lot of time enforcing, because they are a business. But with the governments, if we hold them responsible and ask them to educate the people, I feel like that would be a better and more widespread education of what's actually happening.
Thank you. So in connection to that, Sophia, we have another comment that's asking about similar access and awareness to information about the effects of nuclear warfare. Why do we know little? What is challenging about learning about this, etc.?
So I discussed this in depth in my essay. So I don't know if you guys remember, but in 2018, there was the Hawaiian missile crisis, which was when a false alert was sent out to Hawaiian citizens saying that there was an incoming missile, but it ended up being false. So there's also a lack of information, as I'm sure you know, about what to do if a nuclear weapon was launched. And I mean, I don't think anyone would really know what to do. A lot of the information that I think we would think of, like, you know, seeking shelter and things like that, it's not very updated. So I think our current presidential administration, I mean, especially right now, it's probably not the most prominent concern or worry, but I think it is something that is extremely important to consider. I think the responsibility falls to the governments to, address these issues and help bring more awareness to them, because they are the ones that, you know, have the most experience in dealing with these weapons. So.
All right, I invite other people to send me questions, or if you have a comment, you can raise your hand in the chat. You can think about the overarching question about does great power come greater responsibility, or any of the other questions that were raised by this presentation. Claire would like to speak. Go ahead, Claire.
I have a question for Tanmayee. You talked about how the effects of dumping pharmaceuticals on humans are less obvious as of right now than the effects on animals. Do you think if the effects on humans were more obvious, people would have a different attitude towards dumping their medicine?
Yeah, that was something I was trying to get at as well, because especially as we have seen, like, just in like the general way we view environmental issues, people don't really start to care unless, well, a lot of people don't really start to care unless it starts personally affecting them. And that's what I wanted to get at in my presentation, that despite the fact that the aquatic life are the ones that are suffering now, like, we will inherently suffer as well. So this is something that we should definitely stop now. And that's why, like, humans should be scared of this, and they should make efforts to change it, because in the end, it will come and affect them as well.
Anyone else? We have a few more minutes. Aaron Roth has a question. Go ahead, Erin.
So this is just kind of a what question, not like a what do you think question, but what is the for Tanmayee, what is the official ethical way that you should dispose of extra medication?
Well, the processes for pharmaceutical companies are very complex, and I don't have a complete grasp on that. But for regular citizens, the most ethical way is to follow the FDA regulations. There's like specific regulations on how you should dispose of certain high dose opioids. But in the general sense, you should take your medicine to a medicine drop-off bin. They are in police stations, and some pharmacies collect them, and then the pharmacies and police stations will return them to an area where they are, I guess, more ethically processed, rather than just dumping them down the toilet and having those chemicals enter the waterways.
Great. Vivian would like to make another comment, and she'll be the one that wraps us up today. Go ahead, Vivian.
Thanks. The other thing that I was thinking about when I think about ethics and pharmaceutical companies, I often think about accessibility, because I know that a lot of times life-saving drugs are sold at a price where it's a lot higher than the minimum needed to make a profit. And so I think a lot about like how accessible are drugs and like why are things so expensive. So when balancing the different interests of different ethical issues, it's like, you know, because money is a thing and there's a fine line between greed and necessity when it comes to money. I feel like pharmaceutical companies can definitely lean more into ethics, either from the environmental route or the accessibility route. But if like doing both would make it difficult for them to make definitely play like a significantly larger role. Because if the government were to step in and make it slightly easier for pharmaceutical companies to make ethical choices, or even add more regulations on that, then it might be more feasible for them to balance those interests and think about people more.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
All right, so in order to give us time to transfer to the next session, I'd like us to all unmute ourselves if we can and feel comfortable, and give a big round of applause to Sophia and Tanmayee for a wonderful and engaging, thought-provoking discussion. So everyone, yay! Thank you so much. And we would like to invite you to continue this conversation in your respective spaces, and feel free to email the Ethics Institute with any questions we can forward or comments we can forward to the students. And we will now see you over in session number 2 at 10:45.
Thank you.
Thank you.